Okay, I'm going to start talking about camera settings and techniques. This is the first topic that you're going to cover if you decide to take photography as your subject. Now, camera settings and techniques is basically broken down to shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. And I'm going to go through these and talk about them just briefly, just so you learn how a digital camera works and how we can manipulate the settings so you can sort of optimize the quality of your images and get different effects. Okay, the first camera setting I'm going to talk about is shutter speed. Now, shutter speed on our cameras it's got a little symbol that says TV. Now, you can adjust the shutter speed, and this allows you to take fast moving objects as a photograph, or you can slow the shutter speed down and you can create really good effects like light writing, or maybe sort of that wash as the sea comes in and you get that sort of misty effect. Now, to adjust the shutter speed, there's just a dial on the camera. We put it onto TV and you adjust the dial to a higher speed or a lower speed. The first image that you see here with the girl doing the star jump is on a fast shutter speed. That means that the camera has taken the picture really quickly, which has captured the person in the air. The second picture that you see is an example of light writing. Now, this is where we have set the camera setting to a slow shutter speed, so it's opened up. It's allowed us time to draw the word using a torchlight, and then it closes. And then you're left with that writing in the air. Now, obviously, to prove that you understand camera settings and techniques, we sort of create PowerPoints with examples of your photographs as you manipulated the images, as you can see here. You have great fun. All images can be slightly different. You set your own images up. You can do them outside of school or in school using our cameras. And then you put them into the PowerPoint and you talk about the settings that you've set. So these again are examples of fast shutter speed. There's going to be a few more. I think on the next slide is somebody jumping, a dog. Then there might be some water droplets coming from a flower. And then we're going to move on to slow shutter speed. Now, this is a good example of a slow shutter speed. So the camera's been set to TV. We've adjusted it so the camera shutter stays open. And this is actually Christmas lights, which have just been moved around for about 4 or 5 seconds. And then the shutter is closed. And you get this great trace of light, which has been captured by the camera. Now, on the next slide after this, you will see some more examples of shutter speed. There's some flowers and some more light writing, exactly the same process, but again, what the person's done here is they've taken the photographs, they put them into the PowerPoint, and then they've talked about the settings, just to show that they can change the camera themselves and that they understand the process. Once you understand the process of shutter speed, then you are expected to go and take your own images. Now, the next few slides, I think up to slide 13, are more examples of shutter speed, but obviously taken outside. I've got the light, trails of light from cars. I think there's water droplets coming from icicles. And obviously we have this amazing sort of firework display which is going on that's being captured here. Now, the next setting that we're going to look at is aperture. Now, aperture is the amount of an object, or is a picture that is in focus. Now, we can adjust the aperture so the background becomes more blurred. Now, this will be used if you're doing things like fashion photo shoots and you wanted to concentrate mainly on the model and the background was irrelevant. So we can actually adjust the camera setting so we can make the background more blurred so you focus mainly on what the person wants you to focus on. We can also adjust the aperture so everything's in focus. So, for example, if you're doing landscape photography and you want to see the foreground, the midground, and the background very, very clearly, we would adjust the camera's aperture so to a large f number focal point, and this would make everything in the image completely clear. Okay, slides 14 to 26 are just examples of aperture that you might take yourself and place into your projects. Just gives you a rough an idea of the type of thing that you can be photographing and some of the skills that you will be using. Okay, we're going to now start looking at the third camera setting, which is ISO. Now, ISO is a way of letting in more light into the camera. Now, this would be particularly handy if you're doing things like concert photography, where you can't have your flash going off all the time in somebody's face if they're doing a performance. So what you can do is you can adjust the ISO to let more light into the camera without using a flash. It's also quite a good way as if you're taking pictures during the day and it's quite dull if you want them to be a little bit brighter. So that is the next setting. So you can have some examples of ISO as you can see on the screen and how it can be used. That's just the settings, and it's a dead simple setting to change on the camera, but it's very, very effective. Okay, in the first part of the course, we always look at some basic composition rules in images as well. So once you know how to take your pictures and how to actually adjust the camera, the different camera settings, we look at what makes a good image. Now, one of the basic ones that you'll see a lot used in magazines and in television and movies is something called the rule of thirds, which is basically where you divide a image up into 3 equal lines along the top and the bottom, and that sort of puts a grid. If you have a phone, iPhone, sometimes when you take a picture, if you're adjusting an image to crop it, it will come up with the rule of thirds over the top. Now, this is something that allows you then to place an object that you want the person to focus on one of those key lines. So you look at that object first and then you explore the rest of the image. Now, there's some good examples on the next few slides if you want to have a look at them. Another compositional technique that we look at in photography is viewpoint. And this is just a way of making an image more interesting. It's maybe an angle that you would not normally look at a certain object from. So taking images from above, we call a bird's eye view. If you're taking an image very, very low and shooting upwards, we call it a worm's eye view. Got some good examples for you. The next slide on page 31 is actually a worm's eye view, but they've actually combined the rule of thirds and shutter speed together to create quite a dramatic image of a fairground ride. As you can see, the next couple of slides are just, the students being experimental with viewpoints, learning how to take interest in images. I particularly like this one, which is a worm's eye view shooting up at the person. It's an angle that you wouldn't normally see. They've also used the rule of thirds, which we've talked about, and they've adjusted the aperture on the camera. So at this stage in the course, you'll be learning how to use your camera settings and actually compositional techniques together to create these really interesting images. Obviously, guidance is going to be given at all times. If you get stuck in any way, obviously just ask me and I will help you and I'll explain these processes again for you. Another compositional technique is cropping. Now, allows you to sort of choose the section of the photograph that you think is the most interesting. If you imagine if you have a very powerful lens, you can capture quite a large area on your camera, but then you can go in and you can select that section that you want. So the next couple of slides, especially the one after this that shows you the moon, I think is an excellent example of picking a part of an image which makes that image more interesting. Okay, the next few slides are going to show you examples of what we call framing. That's what's using something natural that you find is a clever way of focusing on the object that you want the viewer to look at. So some of the examples of like the cliff face with the person that you want to look is in the middle. So if you just think of a picture frame and you're just looking for natural objects that occur in nature or man-made and using them as a way of making your compositions more interesting. Now, again, once you've taken your photographs, we just add those into the PowerPoint. Explain your processes just to show that you understand the reasons why you're doing it, and this just goes in to help create your body of work. So hopefully at this stage you are seeing a body of work develop. Now this is the type of thing that we would then submit to the examination board. Your coursework will come up to roughly 60% of your full grade, and your exam part, which is not really an exam but it is another body of work which is worth 40%. The two together obviously give you the 100%, and that's what gives gives you your final grade. Now, we have a really good success rate here at St Anthony's, so if you come, we can guarantee you a fun time, and we can guarantee you, hopefully, if you do the work as we ask you to do the work, a really good grade as well. Depending on what you're photographing and the purpose, obviously it's quite important to think about what is behind that object. So if you want something to stand out quite clearly, you want something that's got a nice light background. So for example, you can see these flowers, and that gives you a nice harmony and a softness to the image. Whereas if you look at the image that's next to it is the fairground, and that stark blackness makes the lights of the fairground really stand out. So it's always worth, when taking your photographs, to consider what's behind it. Now, other things that you have to take into consideration are what we call contrasting colors. So if you want an object to stand out, then obviously what you could do is you could use something like the color wheel, and you could look for its contrasting color, and you could use that as the background. Now, this is a really good technique which is used a lot in fashion photography because it helps make all of the clothing stand out. The next few slides really just are images where the background's being removed or something clever is being done to make the image more interesting. Some of the images that you see, it'll have been the aperture that has been adjusted, which has blurred the background out, so they've used a low F number. And this makes you focus, as we said before, on the object that's the front. Other images like the fairground ride that you're looking at the moment is that stark contrast between the actual object itself and the background, which makes that object stand out. Another good compositional technique to lead the viewer into an image is what we call a leading line. Now, a leading line doesn't have to be a straight line. It could be a crooked line, a path. It could be a banister, a part of a road. But it's a way of starting the viewer at the bottom of an image and leading them into the image to just finally get to the object that you want them to focus on. So there's some good examples of leading lines on the next slides. And obviously, at the end of the project, Camera Sense and Techniques, before we go on to the elements of photography, and that's where we look at which elements are in an image and how they work together. You would do like a little conclusion to basically say what you've learned. Now, this is just really to end your project, and a bibliography, and that would explain the sources that you've looked at, where you've collected any images that you've got from the internet, or any books that you've read, and you would list this, and this is just top and tail the first project, which is Camera Settings and Techniques. Now, obviously, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, or if you catch me around, I think we're going to try and do a drop-in session where you can come and speak to us. But if you can't, well, hopefully I will see you at the start of next academic year. Okay, take care. Thank you very much.